We can go ahead and start then. All right, good evening. My name is Charles Sindel. I'm chairperson of the Webster Groves Plan Commission. We are a 9-member board of citizens appointed by the city council to review development proposals and make recommendations to the city council regarding future development of the city. In addition to the members of the Plan Commission participating in person and via teleconference, we have a few other representatives of the city I would like to introduce. Council Member Pam Bliss, City Attorney Peter Brunschweiger, Planning and Development Director Mara Perry, and Denise Gillespie is our recording secretary. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's monthly meeting of the commission and take this opportunity to explain how we operate. As indicated in our agenda, we will begin with the regular session of the meeting when we will hear new applications for rezoning or subdivisions. We will hear a staff report and the applicant will explain the proposal. We will then ask for comments from the public. At that time, anyone with an interest in the proposal may indicate to city staff that they have a question or would like to express their opinion. To make sure that we accurately record your name, we ask that you fill out a speaker's card if you are here in person and turn it in to Ms. Boleski. For those on Zoom, please click on the raise your hand feature on Zoom. To make sure that we accurately record your name, we ask that you identify your full name and address at the beginning of your comment, either in person or on Zoom, when you make your comments. We ask that you be as concise as possible and not repeat a point made by a previous speaker. We also ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. One person who is a spokesperson for an organization may have 6 minutes to comment. After all citizens have spoken, the applicant will be asked to respond to any questions that have been raised during the hearing. When we have finished reviewing one proposal, we will move on to the next application. Comments concerning items not on the agenda should be made during the public comment section of the agenda near the beginning of the meeting. When we have completed the regular portion of the agenda, we will go into executive session. At that time, the commission will discuss the proposal and may decide to vote on the application or to postpone the decision. You are welcome to remain and listen to the discussion, but there'll be no additional opportunity for public comment at that time. Our recommendations are sent to the city council. In most cases, the city council will conduct a similar hearing and must enact an ordinance before the proposal is finally approved. If the Plan Commission takes a vote tonight, the city council will likely take up this issue at its first meeting next month. If you want information regarding our vote or the progress of the application, you may contact staff at City Hall. Now I would ask the secretary to read the first item on the agenda.
The second item is the approval of minutes from February 7th, 2022.
Anybody have any comments regarding the minutes of the January 10th meeting?
Just a question. Just noticed, I don't believe I saw anything about our illustrious leader here.
Michael, can you make sure to
being
speak
term
in?
limited.
Michael, can you make sure to speak into the microphone? Into the microphone? No, just,
Okay, yeah, I was just saying, I didn't think I saw anything about Charles' term. Is that something you want to put in the minutes or not?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
I thought Charles here said last time, if I heard right, his term as chair is about up. So he's looking to move on.
Yes, he's already acknowledged that with the city council. That wasn't something we needed to put in the minutes.
Yeah, I just noticed I didn't see it in here.
Yeah.
That's my question was, is that?
No, that was a conversation
that
at
we
the
don't need
end. Yeah, it's already been acknowledged by the city council and they already have openings and they've started interviews for new members.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else have comments regarding the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
Second,
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the January 10th, 2022 meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anybody opposed?
Charles, this is Christopher. I'll abstain. I was not at the meeting.
Christopher needed to abstain because he was not at the last meeting.
I'm sorry, what?
Christopher
He's not at the last
needed,
meeting.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Minutes have been approved. Next item, please.
Public hearing, 21
Hold
PC,
on a sec. Sorry.
I'm sorry, public comment.
This is an opportunity for members of the public to make comments on items that are not on the agenda. Is there anybody in the public who wants to make a public comment? Come on up.
Hey, Dave,
Kansas.
did you fill out,
Over here, Kansas.
Dave, did you fill out a speaker card? Okay, that's all right. Come here, and when you're done, will you fill out a speaker card so we have it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Dave Buck, 124 South Elm. Charles, like everybody else in the city, I know who you are. I don't know you very well, but I know that we both went to KU.
Yes, we did.
Rock, Chalk, Jayhawk, KU. Brings back some memories.
Got 3 minutes now.
Ooh.
No, what I just wanted to say, I've lived here 20 years, and like all the residents, when I heard about you were stepping down, I don't know how long you've served on this commission. I don't know how long you've been chairman. I know it's been a long time. But I recently read within the last year a great book called Leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Kearns Godwin, where she profiles 4 specific US presidents. And it's a fascinating book. And I thought about you from that standpoint, because you have been the leader of this commission through some very turbulent times, such as the Douglas Hill, right? And I just want to say that I think you've done a terrific job. You've served the city and the community and the residents from an exemplary standpoint. And I just want to tell you, congratulations.
I appreciate that very much. That's the kind of public comment I like. Thank you. Anybody else? Public comments? Next item.
Public hearing, 21 PC 11, Euclid Elms, an application by Robert Keaney on behalf of Onder Properties LLC to establish a planned environment unit procedure within the A4 7,500 square foot residence district on an approximately 1.09 acre tract of land located at the following addresses: 15 Euclid Avenue, 23 Euclid Avenue, 131 Euclid Avenue, and 133 Euclid Avenue.
Laura?
So I am going to make a presentation this evening for those that are watching on Zoom. My name is Mara Perry. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Webster Groves. The public hearing that's being opened tonight is going to include a little bit of information to help explain the process and to help those understand what we are doing this evening and how the process will continue, and what other times you will have to continue to make public comment in regards to this particular request. So this is a special procedure development process. For those that are on the Plan Commission, you have not had one of these, and not in, I think, the time that any of you have been serving. A special procedure development process follows the same process as a rezoning. But what it does is it's not rezoning the property. It's putting another layer of regulations on top of the existing zoning. So in this case, it is asking for what's called a planned environment unit. That planned environment unit then overlays with the existing zoning, and then creates a way for something to be developed further, potentially above or beyond what would have been allowed under the standard regulations. The process works in this way. It starts with staff research. We do a series of meetings with the applicant. We talk through what their request is going to be. We then do a staff analysis of anything that they submit to us, and we create a Plan Commission report that goes onto the agenda, a staff report for the Plan Commission. At that time, depending on how complex the project is, it can sit with the Plan Commission for multiple meetings based on the additional information that the Plan Commission is requesting. If it's requesting additional information on traffic or on trees or on something related to the architecture or other elements, this is the time for those questions to be asked. But to be very clear, when they submit for this, they're not submitting exactly what they're building. What they're submitting is a proposal so that we can determine regulations. And if we determine that the regulations work and it can be done, it will come back with a site plan before the Plan Commission. It will go to the Architecture Review Board with elevations. So what they're providing us is the basics for us to figure out whether it can work on the property. And using that, we create a series of regulations. If it moves forward from the Plan Commission, it moves forward with a recommendation to the City Council. Another public hearing would be held at the City Council level. And at that point, they will review again all of the regulations. There's an opportunity both at the Plan Commission and at the City Council for the public to be heard and to speak. It then would move forward once the public hearing is closed for a vote before the City Council. Should all of those steps happen and it get voted on, it creates a site-specific ordinance for the particular property, and they would be required to go through a series of steps. So they might have to, in cases of multiple pieces of property that would be developed together, they might have to go through a platting procedure to put all the pieces of property together as one. They would likely have to go through and create a site plan that meets all of the regulations and then come back before Plan Commission. At those points in time, there will not be public comment any longer. So the public comment process is during Plan Commission and during City Council. So what we are looking at in terms of the public hearing process before the Plan Commission at this time, we start with a presentation by city staff. We usually go through the history of the property. We review what the request is. We do an analysis of our zoning. We look and see whether there's any additional information requests, and we make some recommendations. That's usually a standard process. However, this evening, we're going to try to focus on the understanding that we are not asking to close this hearing tonight. We are not asking for a vote at this time. What we're doing is we're introducing it because it is a complex request, and that request is new. It's one that has not been requested in the city in over 20 plus years. So actually around 20 years. So what we're going to focus on tonight is everything in this yellow box, which is the presentation by staff going through the history, the review, and the analysis. We're going to give the opportunity for the Plan Commission to ask questions of staff if there's additional information that they want from the applicant. We're going to ask for public comments regarding the application. We're not going to have a full presentation by the applicant at this time. They're going to be bringing additional information at the April meeting with more detail based on some of the questions that we have and more detail about the proposal. But they are available here tonight to be able to answer some additional questions. But again, we're trying to focus more on the early analysis and try to flesh out key important information that we might need for the next meeting of the hearing. So we're going to focus on what's in the yellow box and then the items in red. We will definitely take public comment, both in person as well as via Zoom. For those that are here in person, there is a card that can be filled out to speak during the public comment portion once my presentation is done. In addition, for those on Zoom, you can raise your hand and make sure that you'll speak both your name and your address so that we can properly document who we have speaking for the meeting. I'm going to briefly talk about the history of planned environment units in the city of Webster Groves, because again, it's been so long since we've had one. In June of 1985, the PEU procedure was added to the zoning code by the City Council. At that time, they created this as an overlay to the underlying zoning. It is only allowed if you are planning to develop 5 or more units. So you can't just do this on a single piece of a single property. You can't do it unless you are at least creating 5 units at one time. In November of 1985, the very first PEU was approved for Webster Oaks Place. For those of you that have driven south on Elm, after you pass by the rec center, it's on the right-hand side. You'll see it. It's a series of attached units as well as some single-family units in a development that was approved all together. And at that time, after they completed it, they platted it out as a condominium plat. So each of their units was platted out for sale, and then they have a shared common ground with their entire subdivision. That was approved in November 1985. The next PEU that was applied for and approved by the City Council was approved in December of 2005. It was for a townhouse development north of Marshall Avenue in the Owen Ridge development area. It was never built, and so it has expired and does not have the ability for it to be constructed. So we essentially have one PEU in all of Webster Groves, and it's from the 1980s. I'm going to go through the history of the property. This property has been zoned since 1923, which is our earliest zoning ordinance, as single-family residential. The boundary of the city did not go all the way to the west of where it is today. In 1960, the portion that includes 133 Euclid, which is the slightly smaller portion of the lot, of the series of lots, was annexed in with another whole area as a part of the city of Webster Groves. 131 Euclid had originally been intended to connect Bell Avenue through to Euclid. So it wasn't and has never been a buildable lot. It is a pretty large swath of land, and I'll show in a little bit more detail how these lots all kind of configure one upon the other. But this is the area has been zoned single-family residential since our first zoning ordinance.
I'm sorry, you're saying that one where your pointer is was
Yep.
never buildable?
It was never
Is that
buildable.
where the street-
I'll explain it in just a minute with the next few slides.
But that's where the street was supposed to go through?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, correct. So the existing zoning is A4 7,500 square foot residence district. The surrounding zoning is primarily all A4 7,500 square foot residents, with the exception of one parcel that is zoned B1 multifamily district. It was originally a series of 4 lots with 3 existing residential structures and the 131 Euclid, which was the substandard lot that was supposed to connect Bell Avenue at some point in time all the way through to Euclid, which had never happened. In March of 2021, a boundary adjustment plat was approved, which is an administrative approval. When 2 pieces of land want to move a boundary between them, they can move that boundary as long as both the lots meet all the basic requirements in that zoning district. So by moving that lot line over, 131 and 23 Euclid both met the minimum requirements of the A4 zoning of being 60 feet wide. So essentially there's a series of 4 potentially buildable lots on that north side of the street. This area, because it is the A4 zoning, does have a area that where I went through and tried to establish how much square footage each of those existing lots could have for a single family home. So 15 Euclid, which is on the eastern side of the property, is a 13,987 square foot lot. You can build up to a 4,196 square foot house. Sorry, I have the word lot over here and it should be house. 4,196 square foot house based on the lot size. About last year, there was a house approved by the Architecture Review Board for that particular lot that was 2,558 square feet. So someone, if they did build that house, could build even more onto that particular structure. 23 Euclid and 131 Euclid, because of their width of lot and their depth of lot, can build up to a 3,543 square foot house under our current regulations. 133 Euclid, which is the smaller lot over here, is an 8,850 square foot lot, which means you can build up to a 2,832 square foot house. I wanted to give the basic regulations of what they could do today if they just simply wanted to build on those properties. Our comprehensive plan analysis, it's something that we usually present to you when you have a rezoning. It really isn't applicable with an overlay because we are not changing the zoning, but I think it's still important to note. It identifies this area as being single family residential. The overlay district is still requesting single family residential. So it is in compliance if there was ever a question about it being in compliance with the comprehensive plan. Our general objective of the comprehensive plan is development and maintenance of a residential community. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what a planned environment procedure is and what it does. So the planned environment procedure in the code is required to look at the ability to develop the land in a slightly different way than it was currently as a series of single-family lots, if it is going to be consistent with good general planning practice through a good site design, if it can be constructed and operated in a manner that's not detrimental to the permitted uses already existing in the district, that it'll be visually compatible with the uses of the surrounding area. And the Plan Commission also has the opportunity that you can consider a number of other things. You can consider the architectural landscape and any other relationships that are going to exist between what's being proposed and what's already there in the neighborhood. You can also prescribe or require specific things or limitations. And I'll go through some of what those limitations are further in the presentation, but you are able to prescribe specific things. A cap on square footage, a way that the development is in terms of what it protects in terms of open space, what kind of trees or landscaping it protects. So those are the things that are supposed to occur with a planned environment unit procedure. In addition, it's very specific that if the city council should approve something like this, it's intended to accomplish 2 or more of the following objectives. And if it doesn't accomplish 2 or more, the city council is not supposed to approve it. So it's supposed to do the retention and avoidance of damage to a substantial number of existing trees by creating another, a more imaginative land planning and building design. So finding ways to protect some of the existing trees on the site, which might mean clustering or moving development further away from the trees. In the Webster Oaks PEU from the 1980s, they had an area that was retained and preserved along the edges of the property that were not able to be touched in terms of trees and landscaping. You're also supposed to be minimizing grading, again, through some imaginative land and planning design, keeping away from areas, maybe building in areas that are more flat and not going into areas that might have severe slopes, and trying to help and retain those areas. You're also supposed to, and again, it's 2 or more of these, retain a substantial amount of open space that doesn't include driveways, road, or parking areas. And then the last one is development of exterior building design intended to be compatible and harmonious with nearby residential development. And again, a lot of these, there are going to be elements that we're going to need more information, but at this point, we wanted to bring this forward because there's a lot to be thinking about. The plan that I have up on the screen now, all of the black dots show a series of existing trees, and then there's also a series of some other existing trees per their tree preservation plan that are shown as being to be removed. This was some of the trees that were to be removed or to be retained due to the demolition of the structures that were already existing on the site, and also during some of the early conversations about what they were potentially going to do with single-family homes on the lots. In determining what can happen with the PEU, there's very specific regulations in the code. In order to determine the amount of units that can be built under a PEU, you first have to show how you're going to build it under a standard subdivision. So they have to come in and show me that they can fit a certain number of lots that meet the A4 zoning regulations, that meet the proper width of lot, that meet the proper frontage, that meet the proper square footage of the lot, while still providing a way to access the property. So in this case, they've provided me with a subdivision plat drawing that identifies how someone would come into this drive entrance, how they would be able to do a turnaround cul-de-sac, so providing the ability for a fire truck and other things to access. They have some placeholders for where the 5 houses would go, and have provided so that I can verify that it meets the square footage of the lot and the minimum frontage of the lot that would be required under the A4 zoning. And the reason why they're able to do as much of this as they are is because they have very deep lots that go deeper than the rest of the lots on this particular street. In the PEU procedure, you can do 120% of the lots that could have been built under a standard subdivision. So under a standard subdivision here, they can have 5 lots, which at 120% allows for 6. So 6 units could be built under the PEU procedure because they can already develop and build 5. And again, as a reminder, a PEU is only allowed for developments that have at least 5 units.
So
Michael,
this
Michael,
picture here
M-
that was in this plan that was in the application materials.
Michael, I
I'm
need,
sorry,
yeah,
I got
I need to speak into
Picture
the,
that was here in the I'm trying to read the caption.
I know, I'm sorry.
This picture that was here, that's just to determine the number of lots. That's nothing they're proposing,
this is not what they're proposing. It's just to determine the number of lots.
number of lots.
Yeah.
So this is with the regular A4.
If they were going to develop a subdivision under the regular A4 zoning, they have to meet a certain width of lot, a certain square footage of lot, and they have to meet a certain private street width requirement. If they can do all of that, then that determines the base number that they work off of. They do not intend to build this.
So each one of these lots shown is a minimum 7,500 square feet, and they have 60-foot frontages. And
Correct.
the street that they're shown on there, it's a standard, like, right of way as what we would,
It is not a public street right of way. It's a private street right of way.
okay, so they're using the number of a private street.
They're using for private street, not the full 50-foot right of way width for a public street, which they are required, or they're allowed to do that under the code. You can determine a subdivision. It just means that all those units would have to maintain it privately. But yes, you are correct. So once we figure out that determination that they could, if they get approved for a PEU overlay, we would want to analyze all the different elements of what they're proposing to do and determine what kind of regulations we would want to put in place should you decide to move this forward to the city council. In our zoning analysis, I'm going to go through a whole series of elements that are both in my staff report, but I'm going to explain them in a little more detail here. We're going to look at the uses. We're going to look at the density. We're going to look at dimensional regulations, and those dimensional regulations include setbacks, height, and intensity of use. We're going to look at parking, access and circulation, tree preservation and landscaping, architectural review board. And then do know it was sent to the other departments just for the basics of building code and fire code. Those would also come into play in case there's any other regulations that we would want to put in place. So the Public Works Department gave some things that they thought that they would need to be put in place in the ordinance. This is all to figure out that if you were going to move forward and send this to council with a vote of recommendation, what are all of the regulations you want to put in that ordinance that they would have to meet in order to move forward? So the first thing is related to use. So again, this goes back to the ordinance from 1980, ordinance amendment that came into play from the council from 1985. The planned environment unit allows for the following uses as an overlay. You can have detached single-family dwellings, attached single-family dwellings, two-family dwellings, multiple family dwellings, accessory community facilities, and you can even have some limited commercial uses. And all of this would be in excess of what you would normally be allowed in an A1 through an A4. So as a reminder, the PEU can be done in any of our 4 residential zoning districts, as long as you are meeting the minimum requirements of the underlying zoning, and as long as you have at least 5 units that are being developed.
Mara, what's the difference between attached single-family dwellings and two-family dwellings?
So many times 2-family dwellings are above one another, so they're on top of each other. And sometimes they are for rent, whereas attached single-family dwellings are single-family homes, typically for sale. I mean, you can still rent them out, but typically for sale, they usually have a common wall. So attached would be common wall, 2-family usually more of a rental, or they're stacked on top of each other. So you would have to either condo plat them as condos one above the other. So we usually call those more the 2-family. I'm also using just the language that has been in the code since the 1950s, which then continued with the drafting of the PEU code in the 1980s. This proposal that has been brought before us is for 3 sets of attached single-family dwellings for a total of the 6 units, which matches the calculation that we did for the PEU based on a standard subdivision. They did provide us with 2 different plans. Those 2 different plans, again, are scenarios that we can use to try to help develop what we would want those regulations to be should they come forth with a plan for these 6 units. When we look at density, so this goes back to with the 5 standard units, meaning the basic A4 zoning requirements, under the standard subdivision with the 120%, it would allow 6 units to be built versus the 5 in the standard subdivision. The proposal is for 3 sets of attached single-family dwellings for the total of 6 units. The one plan that was put in the packet was for townhouses that were attached to each other, all with a frontage on Euclid. The second proposal was for more smaller clustered single-family homes that would have shared driveways to each pair and would have 3 sets of driveways versus a one-way drive access. And I'm going to go into more detail about the 2 different ones, but both of them were only proposing 6 units. Under the dimensional regulations per the code, the minimum required front yard setback within the PEU gets established in one of 2 ways. You either take every house along that block and average them, but you only do that if there's not a differentiation of more than 10 feet. In this case, because of the way that the street works, there is a house on the far eastern corner that is very close to the street, which makes the differentiation more than 10 feet. So because of that more than 10 feet, the front yard setback is established by the 2 closest properties on either side and the average of the 2 of them. When you take the 2 closest on either side of this particular grouping of properties, the average between the 2 of them would establish a 19.04 setback from the front property line facing Euclid. In addition, the PEU requires a minimum of a 25-foot buffer around the side and rear property of the PEU. It also allows you to have 0 setback lines within the PEU and no minimum setback distance between the dwelling units. So it does allow the units to be attached to each other. It allows a 0 setback. It allows that if you want to do smaller lots within the development, that those do not have particular setbacks within those. But again, it still allows the Plan Commission to expand upon these. So should there be an area that you want to look at for saving, for open space, an area that you want to look at for saving particular trees, you can change or reestablish a set of setbacks that are more restrictive than the minimum requirements that are in the code. I went ahead and overlaid the red line setbacks of the minimum requirements in the code on top of the 2 proposals. This is an overlay of the setbacks onto the townhouse proposal, which you can see there's quite a bit of additional area back here that under the setbacks could be built, as well as here. So those might be, if you were going with that scenario, you could potentially change or expand to create more open space and move that buildable line. This is the other scenario that proposes a series of clustered pairs. This is where the red setback minimum line is. Again, you can create something that's more unusual and you can do it as a attachment. It doesn't have to necessarily be, I know it's hard. Sometimes there's the hard and fast. It's this many feet from a particular property line, but sometimes you can do it as an exhibit if you need a really unusual shaped setback. The next dimensional regulation that we always want to talk about is related to height. So the PEU code allows a greater height than typically is allowed. our A4 7,500 square foot residence district allows you to have a 2.5 story, no more than 35 feet. The way that the PEU is established says you can have an increased outer buffer distance if you are going to exceed 3 stories. The proposal is not asking to go any taller than the 2.5 stories. In fact, it's proposing 2-story structures. And so at this point, it's not asking for anything additional or asking for any, buffers because of that additional height. Intensity of use. This is an important one because it covers 3 different things. It covers how much coverage is being done with structures on the property, which then relates directly to open space. So lot coverage is a ratio of the footprint of the buildings in relationship to the overall size of the lot. We then also do a calculation related to floor area ratio. That is a ratio of the interior gross floor area of all stories of a structure in relationship to the total area of the lot. And then the last one is minimum land area per dwelling unit. So when we have a requirement in our zoning code for a minimum lot area for a unit for a single family, we sometimes have reduced lot areas when we have multiple family. But in this underlying zoning of the A4, there's a minimum lot size requirement. So in comparing and contrasting, the A4 currently requires no more than 40% lot coverage. It requires a 0.32 floor area ratio if the lots are less than 10,000 square feet. And it requires a minimum land area of 7,500 square feet. So I went ahead and ran the preliminary numbers on lot coverage, floor area ratio, and minimum land area for both scenarios that were being proposed. The townhouse plan, which is the one that's up first, shows a lot coverage of 20.21%. And just as a reminder, that's just for structures. It does not include in our code driveways. And I know we've had a whole conversation with the Plan Commission about amending our code to start taking into account some of that for stormwater calculations. But for now, it's not in there yet, but it is shown on here as a proposal of 20.21 lot coverage. And again, the allowance in A4 is 40%. In this scenario, it shows a 0.31 floor area ratio. That's again, just using a preliminary number that they've thrown in there for a square footage of the house. Doesn't mean that that's the one you have to allow, but you can use a floor area ratio to determine how large or the largest size that you would allow in that particular area. Based on the square footage of the overall lot, if you add all these parcels together, and then you divide it by the 6 dwelling units, each of those dwelling units would have a minimum land area, whether it's shared or not shared, but 6 units would divided into that would give you 7,894 square feet, which is above the minimum 7,500 square foot for lot size. In the second scenario, which is the cluster plan, the lot coverage is up slightly at 21.69%. And again, this is just using some really rough scenarios. We haven't specifically said that, any particular floor plans are allowed or square footage is allowed, but we're just using those rough numbers to kind of get an anticipation of if they were to put those structures on as they have proposed, what would it mean? This one also shows a 0.36 floor area ratio. So again, that number is slightly higher than the 0.32 that we currently allow in the code. As a reminder, when they have attached garages, 50% of the square footage of the garage counts towards that floor area ratio. If a detached garage is taken out, the floor area ratio goes down because you don't count the square footage of the garage. In this scenario, because it's the same number of units and the same land size, they're also going to have 7,894 square feet of land area per unit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just went through that, what you just went through and reading the application. Am I correct in saying that this PEU, as it's presented, has less coverage than could potentially be built on that existing A4?
You are correct. It has less coverage than could potentially be built. I will say that most of our houses are under the proposed lot coverage. But it's keeping down smaller and not proposing to expand the overall lot coverage.
But that, they could go build it denser than this right now. On this.
It could go denser than this right now, correct? And in the PEU, we can put a restriction in that they would have to have a lot coverage that is smaller than the standard A4. So right now, the standard A4 is at 40%. The standard A4 remains at 40% until someone goes and completely changes the code for all of our zoning districts. But right now it's at 40%. Under this PEU, we could restrict it to a smaller number.
Okay.
I'm going to go into parking. Our code requires on single family residential that you have one parking space per unit off street behind the front line of the house. It doesn't have to be in a garage. It has to be on a paved surface and has to be back in line behind the front of the house. So it's on the side or in the rear, and you are required to have that one parking space. Garages count in those off-street parking spaces if someone has a garage or has a carport. Both of these preliminary development plans identify a 2-car garage providing 2 off-street parking spaces for each of the 6 units being proposed. Zoning access and circulation. We always talk about how the access is going to happen into various lots. When it is a single family lot that it's going to have a single house, they are allowed to have 1 curb cut. If they can meet a certain minimum requirement in terms of turning radius, they can technically have a circle drive with 2 curb cuts. It's pretty difficult on a 50-foot wide lot. You can sometimes get one on a 60. You really need to have larger in order to get a proper turning radius to get a circle drive in the front of a property. In this case, most of these lots could really only handle a single curb cut with a single drive way, whether it's to an attached garage or a detached garage on the property. The 2 proposals that are shown in the proposal that is the townhouse plan, they were including 2 curb cuts. There are currently existing 3 curb cuts on this particular grouping of properties. It's proposing 2 curb cuts and a one-way drive system that would access on one side of the townhouses, have all of the access for garages off the back, and then come back out again with another curb cut as a one-way system. So that's one proposed means of ingress and egress in this particular one. In this second scenario, it's a series of, there are 3 curb cuts now. They're proposing 3 curb cuts, and each of those curb cuts provides a shared system that would access some homes. Now, as a reminder, this is just a really rough scenario of can they fit this on the property? So conversations about whether it's a front entry garage, whether it's not a front entry garage, those are things that can be put into the architectural elements or regulations of the code. At this point, you know, the scenario of where the front of the houses actually sits and how all of this would be developed architecturally to fit with the community would be things that would need to be discussed.
I have a question.
Yes.
So those interior drives that you have, you know, they're not really streets, right?
Correct.
So it's not considered, so the garage wouldn't have to be behind that drive. It's basically the street would be Euclid.
So in this case, the street would be Euclid. So if they are driving in, for example, to these right here, these would be considered side entry because they'd be coming off the side and the garage doors would not be facing Euclid.
Okay.
And so the way that the various ones are being shown at this point is showing that these 2 would be side entry. These 2 would probably be side entry. And then these other 2 would also technically be side entry, but with the garage attached to the rear of the house. Correct.
Mayor, I hear the word townhouse, I hear the word condominium. I don't know if they're really 2 different things as far as these submittals, but those the driveways then are gonna be in some kind of shared easement, I guess, to the condos or to individual property?
So the overall development, once it would be done, and this is similar to what was done with Webster Oaks, they would have to plat their plat for this entire development as an overall subdivision. And then they would provide easements, whether they are shared driveways between certain units, overall shared open space for the entire development. They could also plat the condos so that each of them could have a lot of this land and have less of the shared overall. It could just be the tree area that is maintained by their subdivision indentures that would be created. But all of this would come down to how they plat it for how they want to sell the units and how the units would then be established.
So theoretically, could each property owner be responsible for, let's say, clearing the snow on their driveway or not do it?
In this case, again, just this real rough scenario, there would be a shared driveway that they would need to have an agreement together for how they would access that pair. We have a lot of shared driveways in Webster Groves, and some of them have shared easements and some do not. Most of them have a shared way that they're supposed to maintain them. So we would probably state in the ordinance that they have to establish how the shared driveways would be maintained and who would have the maintenance of them.
But they would have to have that included in their plan.
They would. So the next thing is Architecture Review Board. Trying to make sure that everyone understands that every one of these structures will have to go before the Architecture Review Board. They would likely go through as a grouping together because of the way that they interact with one another. But the applicant does plan to bring examples of housing types to the next meeting, because that will give some examples to help further develop what you think you need to want to put in the ordinance. But at this time, we weren't bringing any of those scenarios because we had so many other elements to make sure you understood that we needed to consider as we were looking forward for what additional information we might want from the applicants for the next meeting in order to establish a draft of the regulations. So I'm about to get to this items to consider for inclusion in the ordinance. Before I get to that, are there any other questions about some of the analysis of the different elements?
I didn't necessarily have just one thing I didn't see in there, I didn't think it covered, especially with that unbuildable lot. Do we know there's no existing easements or utilities of size in that?
There are none. It was not established as a paper street, and no easements were put in place for that area. So for any of our members that are on Zoom, do any of you have questions? Okay, I'm going to move on. Oh, sorry, did one of them? Nope. I'm going to move on to items for consideration for inclusion in the ordinance. In your packets at the very end, I did start a very, very rough draft of some of the regulations, trying to keep in mind some of the important elements of consideration. So one of the things would be placing a maximum number of units into the ordinance so that it's very clear how many units can be established. The next thing would be creating setbacks. You have the ability to consider the setbacks that are in there, something that could be more restrictive, or a series of setbacks. You could make a requirement that certain units have to have a distance between them, but under the code, it's not required. So there's a minimum set, and then you can do others above and beyond. Platting requirements, which I know we've kind of briefly talked about or hit upon. In order to, I think there was a lot of confusion as to why, there's lot lines currently shown between these 4 lots. Until the development has been approved to be able to have this PEU, we don't want to consolidate those lot lines, because should this not move forward, or should this not be approved by council, those lot lines remain in place and they can continue to build the 4 single-family homes that are able to be approved under the current zoning without the PEU. So if they do get approved for this, we would want to put in that they do need to consolidate the lots. That then once the lots are consolidated and construction has undergone, similar to the Webster Oaks plat, once each of the units was built, they would plat the condo, because you want to plat it once it's been built. So you have exact regulations of where their land is covered. And using that coverage, they're able to look at the exact location of where they might be able to build a deck off the back of the house, or what might be considered their part of their yard, or maybe where you might allow them to put a privacy fence. So all of those things would be established with a condominium plat. You can establish a floor area ratio in here. That floor area ratio does not necessarily have to match what's in the code. I showed you the differentiation between the different types of units, the requirements under the A4, and then the ability to, you can lower it, you can increase it, you can look at what that would be in terms of the overall consistency with what's surrounding and in the community. Site coverage and open space is pretty important for us to look at, because one of the things is that they are preserving open space that would not be able to be developed, that they're preserving trees and other areas. Height, if you want to put a height requirement in, it can be what's already currently in the underlying zoning, and it has that opportunity. There's also a way to increase it per the code, but it has additional buffer setbacks. Parking, if you wanted to do something above and beyond, or just say meet the code, if you do want to require that they have 2, because the number of units has gone from having what could be 4 single-family homes. With the subdivision, it's 5. With the 120%, it's up at 6. It is a narrow street. There is limited on-street parking. So thinking about or considering and ensuring that there is off-street parking because of the number of units could be something that could come into play. They are proposing 2 parking spaces for every unit, and that would leave some on-street. They are also proposing either just the 3 curb cuts or the 2 curb cuts, which would mean that there would be additional on-street that wouldn't be blocked by ingress egress. And then the last one, which is very important, is landscaping and tree preservation. What areas would be preserved, how much would be preserved, and whether there are setbacks that are established to preserve those specific areas. So just as a reminder, staff is requesting that this hearing be kept open. It be kept open until the April 4th meeting. At that point, we would get into more information regarding what staff's recommendations are. Continuing to have additional public comment as needed. Allow the Plan Commission to ask additional questions beyond those asked today. A more formal presentation by the applicant at that time, because we wanted to get at least some of the early questions related to these couple scenarios. And then if you should determine at the April meeting that you want to close the public hearing and vote on it, that opportunity could happen at the next meeting, but staff would request that you keep it open at this time.
Just to have a couple of questions. The floor area cannot exceed 0.32?
No, there is no floor area requirement in the PEU. The 0.32 is what's currently in the underlying zoning.
So we could make it larger or smaller?
You can make it larger or smaller. It
Is that
doesn't.
the same with the height?
The height allows you to go taller with buffering. So you're supposed to add additional setbacks should you go taller. They're not requesting to go taller. And then depending on the scenarios, they're pretty close to the 0.32 and there are 2 scenarios. Again, these were rough layouts to try to think through what those potential regulations would be.
And is the 19-foot front yard setback, is that the minimum setback?
That's the minimum setback.
In other words, we couldn't say, oh, we'll make it 10. It's got to be at least 19.
There's a minimum setback of the 19. It can be expanded to be a little further back. And in the townhouse scenario, they did show them sitting further back from the street. In the other scenario, they didn't, I think because of how they were laying it out on the lot. But in the two scenarios, yes, there's a minimum setback. You can make it more restrictive, but it does not appear in the code that you can make it less restrictive.
Just a little homework. Can you give us some reference to the, what's it called? Elm, the other PEU.
Mhm.
Can you give us some idea of the square footages, the lot coverage, what some of those numbers are?
I can provide that at the next meeting.
You're asking for
So
homework.
yes, so I'm going to start,
for homework.
I'm going to start a list of things that you would be asking for. So for the,
Just
you
for
want-
reference, so I could, like, what's the size of that lot? What did they determine was the total gross for? What are those numbers?
yeah. And just so you know, their ordinance did not include a floor area ratio because back in the 80s, we didn't have a floor area ratio requirement. And their lots are interesting. If you look, I'm going to go back for a second. If you look at the way that it shows up on our maps, that there's these really large lots, but actually the condo plat, sorry, going through here. So you can see on our zoning map, it shows these really, like these lots are pretty large. There's a couple that come really far back, but that's actually some of the area that's maintained. And when you see the condo plat, it was pretty tight. They gave them, I think, an extra maybe 7 or 8 feet to be able to do small decks off the backs of their homes. But the condo plat really establishes a very, very tight window around their structures.
Is that an A4 underlying?
Yes, that one was an A4 underlying 2, if I am remembering correctly.
And they did that to preserve the open space that they had?
They did that to preserve the open space and to preserve existing trees, tree canopy.
Okay. My other question is, Hawken, what is it, Hawken Place or Hawken, that's a condo, right? And was that a rezoning?
That was a rezoning
Okay.
to a B1,
Okay.
not to a PEU.
Okay,
Yeah, so that's a B1 multifamily.
right.
And then that was condoed out as townhouses.
Okay, and could you get us some numbers of floor area ratio and like lot coverage of that development too?
Yep.
Just to get an idea of sizing and mass and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, I will get the condo information for Hawken.
Thank you.
Any other things, and this includes Plan Commission members online, any other things that you think you would like us, either staff or the applicant, to provide for the next meeting?
You said there were going to be drawings next meeting.
They have some images of examples of the type of housing that they're thinking about in terms of just the overall sort of look and of some other cluster type housing I know. And so they will be providing that. That will be in the packets. So they will be available to both the commission and the public when the packets go out the Wednesday before the April Plan Commission meeting.
Why would a developer want to do a planned environment unit? Is that just to avoid the rezoning?
No, because you can't actually rezone this to do anything more. We're in the most intense zoning district already. So these have minimum lot sizes of, well, minimum lot widths of 60 feet. So you can't cut them down any smaller unless they're going to put in the full turnaround and circle drive. These lots are really deep. And in being really deep, it doesn't necessarily do much for the residents. The resident who would buy the house could build a really big house on it, but might not, and then is paying the taxes on all of that land. So you're paying taxes on a 13,000 square foot lot in an area that, the minimum lot size is only 7,500 square feet, but you can't split it because we don't allow you to split and do what we call flag lots, where you drive a driveway and access behind. You have to have a street frontage. And so you're in an unusual situation. You've kind of got both of these things happening. And I'm just going to remind people, I keep seeing chat elements coming up with questions. There will be an opportunity where you can raise your hand and talk. You'll have 3 minutes to speak when we get to the point where the public can speak.
Okay. I had one other question. Do we have any idea how much these units might cost?
So that's not a consideration that you can take into account when you're looking at the overlay of the zoning. I'm sure the applicant can tell you what they're thinking, but it's not supposed to be a consideration for you on what they are going to sell for.
Okay.
The consideration relates to the land, square footage, how you develop it, what it gets developed, architecture, zoning, all of that.
Okay.
That, your answer there, I did have a question kind of along those lines. There was a language in here, what you provided about, it can't tax the utilities, the development can't, is that really what we're voting on then? As long as it doesn't do those 5 things?
It's a combination of multiple things. And so you both have to look at the whole list. I'm going to go back to the list of what you're supposed to consider, in addition to the CUP requirements. So when you come back to what you have to consider, you are supposed to look at that it's consistent with good planning practice and good site planning, that it can be constructed and operated in a manner that's not detrimental to the permitted uses of the district, that it's visually compatible with the uses of the surrounding area, that you also are going to consider the architectural relationships, the landscape relationships, any other relationships between the proposed development and the overall character of the surroundings. So the other houses, the other house lots, and you will prescribe and can prescribe some things that would help, or in your opinion, enhance the neighborhood character. On top of it, it has to accomplish 2 or more of these objectives: retaining and avoiding the damage to a substantial number of existing trees, minimizing the grading of the site, retaining a substantial amount of open space, and developing the exterior building design to be compatible with the nearby residential development. So all of those come into play. In addition are the 5 factors, which isn't going to do harm for the community, isn't going to overtax public utilities, isn't going to cause traffic hazards or congestion. I'm going to forget there's another one. And I didn't put them in here because I was going to put them in the next hearing with all of the different things, with all of the regulations.
You go ahead.
I guess I would say you ask what you might want for the next meeting. That slide before, it seemed pretty easy to answer, easy enough for me to answer, but I guess I would ask if the developer is going to speak, especially on that slide where you just were, those, pick 2 and they can explain how they're going to accomplish those things. I think I would ask the developer to explain that to me when he speaks next week.
Well, that is correct. They're going to have to show what trees they're going to save, what open space they're going to have, and what are the elements that would come into play. They will be required to propose that and show that, both through the drawings and through their discussion. So they will be presenting that at the next meeting.
And I'd have very specifically, like you did with your little table comparing PUs like you always do. If I'm going to ask that developer if they want this, they should convince me. It should be pretty simple. It is what it is.
Does our vote in any way affect the council having to have a supermajority?
So if, and I apologize, I have to go back to the bylaws. We will have the special procedure is similar to a rezoning. So it is very similar where if you have, so you've got 9 members. If it is a vote against, then it would require a supermajority to overturn your vote against.
Okay,
So that would come into play.
all right.
You need 5 members to vote for it to not have a supermajority of the council to vote at the next meet, at their next meeting after.
I actually think so. It's only a vote. It's a vote to pass against. So if it's a vote for that doesn't pass, that does not require.
Correct.
Okay.
And then I had 2 questions on your suggestions here. The condo plat, comply to chapter 50, that's going to cover all the road easements and everything.
That is correct. The plating requirements in chapter 50 cover all of the requirements of how to do a condominium plat. So yes, you are correct.
And then number 12, drive lanes should be rounded.
That was a very specific Public Works comment in regards to when we first received the submittal, it was just the townhouse plan. And that submittal with the townhouse plan just very roughly just shows kind of squared off driveways. So they were just simply providing us some additional information.
I guess rounded. I mean, if I put a 1 foot radius on there, have I rounded it?
And again, it was just a very rough set of regulations. We will continue to hone in on what those regulations should be, but I just put in what Public Works had asked about. And at this point, we would put more specifics, but this is a very, very rough and a starting point for you all to see what we would typically put into an ordinance.
You have 15-foot driveway. Your suggestion is 15-foot one-way drive. Is that enough if, say, a fire truck had to get to the back of those buildings?
So the Public Works Department had their minimum 15 foot. I had not gotten all of my comments back from fire department. They were wanting to look at the various scenarios. Typically, when it comes to units behind, they would probably want more for the one where they have to go further and deeper into the lot. For the pairs that are currently like they are today, just like any other single family residential house, they'd be able to access both of them from the street. So they wouldn't be required to need to go back behind them. So they would not need to have that turning radius for the one-way drive. They would just park in front and fight the fire from the front.
Do we have any members that are remote that want to?
I was just going to say, any of the members, Planning Commission members that are currently remote, do any of you have additional comments or questions of things that you would like staff or the applicant to provide?
Not right now, Mara. I'll email any in as I think of them, but thank you. This has been really well organized.
Thank you, Maddie.
Mara, you mentioned setting a maximum on the units. Is there a minimum based on what's been talked about or submitted, or the size of the acreage?
Well, so overall, if they did just a standard subdivision, they would be able to get in 5, which is
Okay.
that scenario they provided. If they do not get the PEU, they can have 4. So really,
Okay.
there would just be a maximum number that we would put in place.
Okay. No, this is helpful. I'd be interested to hear more from the developer next time.
Definitely.
Okay, as I understand it, we're going to do public comments now.
We're going to do public comments now. And I'm going to really quick. So I know that there's a couple comments that came in the chat. I'm going to recommend that those that are in the chat, when it comes time for public comment, that they can raise their hand. What we would do is we would start first with those that are here in person with their speaker cards, and then we'll go to the various ones on Zoom and do them at that time. And then just as a reminder, which I know you said it already, 3 minutes for each person. And then if there are things that we don't necessarily answer questions right at this time, we will take all of their comments in and then provide comments potentially at the next meeting if there's more detailed questions.
And Denise, do you have speaker cards? No speaker cards. Let's bring them up here.
Oh, yeah. You're fine. Go ahead.
Bring them up.
Go ahead and come up and then you can hand the speaker card to me. It's fine. Go ahead. You're good.
I just have 2 or 3 questions.
Anything,
Am I,
please?
yeah, sorry. My name is Urbad Majid. I live at 134 Euclid Avenue. I just have a few questions for what you all consider when you're looking at plans such as this. When you're considering traffic flow, do you consider, like, when you're talking about traffic considerations, do you consider existing traffic flow? Like, what do we do to evaluate that? Because this is a very busy street sometimes of the day. It's used as a cut through between Webster and Rock Hill to get around Brentwood traffic. So
I guess the answer is one of the 5 factors is traffic congestion, right?
That
So
is
we do
correct.
Consider that.
We do consider that. And I don't want to take away from your 3 minutes. So if you just want to say all the
Okay.
different questions that you
Got
have,
it.
and we can get back with
All
you
right,
on
that's
those.
fine. Could this ever be a gated community? Ever? Like, that's another question I have. Does the planning commission, this is kind of a general question, but it is related to this. Or what role does the planning commission play in, or does it play any role in the changing of hands of city property? So that 131 Euclid, like when that did change hands between this, I'm assuming it was the city and the private owner, what was that process? And it ties into things that have happened in that community, in our community, and with other city properties. And then specifically considering the calculations made for the intensity of use, do you compare it to what's, or not what's there now, it's all been demolished, what was there before? Or do you only consider the plans that are in front of you? Those are the questions I have.
Okay. So since you're since you did your 3 minutes, I wanted to give you enough time to have all your 3 minutes. I'm going to answer a couple of those questions because they're pretty easy ones to answer. So I'm going to not answer the question about the traffic. We usually make some determinations based on what would be allowed there today without a rezoning. And then what is the increased flow between, like if you can currently have 4 homes and each of those homes can have an occupancy level of, 8, and you can have 2 teenagers with cars plus 2 people with cars. We don't have a way to monitor that or know that, but in the overall case, it's 1 additional unit on that street above and beyond what they would normally be allowed. So we would look at that in terms of traffic. Can it be a gated community? Well, yes, but really you would only have a gated community if you had that 1 turnaround in the circle drive for it, because the other proposals don't really show anything, like there's no gated street or anything else like that. So it really couldn't be gated, but yes, as a private subdivision, they could put some fences around it. The role of 131 Euclid. So when a piece of unbuildable property is available, whether it's available because it's gone to St. Louis County for back taxes and has not been paid, whether it's an odd sliver that's been left over from some old platting requirement, both the county and the city are required in their code to first offer it up to the property owners on either side. So you can't just offer some random person to be able to buy a sliver between, because it causes issues related to someone, holding on to something that could make it harder for someone to develop. And I know that in the past, county didn't always carefully monitor who it was given to. And in a couple of cases, someone has bought something out from under someone that was part of their lot. So the city did offer it up to the property owners on either side, which at the time, the property owners on either side were the same person. So the property owner on either side was given the opportunity to purchase it from the city, and they did purchase it. It wasn't just given to them. And a fair market value was assessed with a full evaluation of land. The calculation of comparing what was there. So there's an odd calculation when you think about it. What is there today doesn't mean, so like if there was a 1,400 square foot house there, we don't always compare what's there today. We usually compare what can any of you build on your lots at the absolute maximum. Because at any time you can build an addition on your house, you can expand your house, you can tear it down and rebuild your own house on that same lot, and you're all going to be given the same calculation in relationship to the size of lot. So you're all going to have a ratio of how big the land is to how much house size. And that's why in the beginning of the presentation, I gave what each of those lots individually could have. And then we always use that as a comparison in the overall number.
Who else?
Who else is next?
Kansas.
Thanks again. Two things. One, I think it's very interesting that current city council member Emerson Smith lives just down the street from this development on Euclid. Emerson is Black. He's lived there a very long time, long-term residents of North Webster, and his house, very nice house, but it's a lot smaller than a 4,000-foot square house, which would be maybe twice as big as this current house. So, which leads to my second point, which is the concept of gentrification. We all know that it's been going on. It's been going on in North Webster, I think, for too long. We all know what it is. Developers come in, they tear down an old, smaller house. They build a larger, expensive, quote, McMansion. They raise the price. Property values go up. Property taxes go up. And the unfortunate consequence is that it displaces a lot of long-time, in this case, Black residents who cannot afford to live there anymore. And we all know that has happened. So gentrification, to me, is not the enemy. There are positive things that can come out of gentrification. But the negative things is that it can displace long-term, loyal, proud, particularly in this case, lower income Black residents of North Webster. And if these houses are going to be 4,000 square feet, your question, Charles, about the price of these houses, I think is totally valid and relevant. Because if the developers are looking to charge 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 for these homes, here we go again. And I think it should be a consideration for the Plan Commission and City Council. And the last comment I'll make on gentrification is that cities have a choice. Cities can choose to embrace gentrification, or cities can choose to fight it. I don't think our cities made a decision, or they've just sat back and just let it happen. And again, there have been some negative consequences, and I think it should be a consideration for this project. Thanks.
Thanks. Anybody else out there in the audience who wants to make a comment?
Hi, my name's Ellie Lang, and we don't live there yet, but my partner and I are working on 22 Euclid to eventually live there.
I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. My name's Ellie Lang, and I don't live there yet, but my partner and I are working on 22 Euclid to make it habitable and so that we can move in. And my question is so if the developers were to not get the PEU or not have applied for the PEU in the first place, are there any other, or what is the approval process like for just building four homes on those 4 lots? Like, is there like a commission like this, or is there like public, like, or neighborhood feedback, or is it just like you can build more or less what you want? I assume it would go to like an architectural review board, but like, what's that process like? So that's my question, really. And then I just have a comment, which is, this is outside of the scope of like this one issue, but just kind of generally speaking, can anyone speak to like and maybe someone can speak to this too, but the PEU concept in general, I assume is just there to like promote more development, but my comment, I guess, is that it can be kind of frustrating that like a developer or someone who's going to develop, I think you said 5+ units, has the ability to apply for or try to get special exceptions to do things on their properties, but someone who's not going to develop 5+ units doesn't have that opportunity. So that's just kind of, to me, like favoring someone who has enough money to develop 5 units, and not anybody else who just lives in someplace in Webster. So that's all.
Okay, thank you.
So briefly for single family homes, there is no public hearing requirement. The Architecture Review Board would review, so on a single family lot, the Architecture Review Board reviews the home development. We do put a sign in the yard to let you know that it's going before the Architecture Review Board, but it's not a hearing. So you can come and listen and you can see the plans. Other than that, it just moves through the standard permit review process for construction. So it does not have public input. And then in regards to the PEU, it appears based on the minutes that I've read from the 1980s, it's not that it's saying that you can, the intent, it appears, was to try to preserve more trees and open space. So trying to cluster things closer together than you normally would allow so that you could potentially save other areas. So it's a give and take. I mean, you might be getting another unit, but you are giving by, there's going to be protected areas, existing older growth trees and other open space that you will not be able to touch. And you can't make that change and later go, oh, I wanted to build another garage or a pool or a something. So the intent was similar to our planned commercial zoning. It's a give and take. You ask for certain things, but you have to show what you're going to give for it. And it gets compared and looked at on whether that overlay makes sense. Anyone else here that wanted to speak? If not, I'm going to go to the people on Zoom. Okay. Okay. So Nicole Hammonds, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, I live at 116 Madison. I've been a Webster Groves resident for 51 years. I've been a homeowner for 20. And this whole proposal seems like it will change the personality of this community. The project sounds like it's something more that would belong more on the other side of Webster than on this side of Webster. This area was made for homes and houses, not for condos and the gentrification of the people that have been here for years and years. And this just seems like this is really the beginning of pushing us out. So I would like to know why this area was chosen over an area like where Webster Oaks is. I mean, it seems like you could just put this project right next door. And that is my comment.
Thank you. I guess I'll just briefly answer. This is not something that the city initiated. It's a private property owner. So someone who owns property is the one who asks for it for their particular location. So it's not something that the city has initiated and said, this is the area that we are asking for this. It's a private request. So Joel, oh, there you go.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Hey, my name is Joel Pryor. I live on 220 Lithia Avenue. I was actually just curious and maybe a little confused or didn't understand if you could just kind of answer this. I understand, or it sounded to me like there may not have been the ability to manipulate this large plot of land into subdivided single family units. So for example, make this into, instead of 4 lots, 3 lots, and then building out 3 single families versus putting in this complicated and going for this PEU. Is there a reason for that, or did I misunderstand? If you could just kind of clarify that for me. And I'm assuming the developers are there, if they could have that prepared in their presentation for April 4th on why this would be a better value to the community versus putting in 3 or 4 single family homes onto those lots. Thank you.
So we'll definitely add that to the list for them to ask. I don't see anyone else on with their hand up. I know there were some questions in the chat, and I'd hoped that the people who were asking the questions in the chat would raise their hand. So instead, I'm just going to read out the items in the chat so that we can put it in the record as some additional questions that might be able to be asked, because I want to make sure that we have all the questions. This says, we live on Bell right behind this build. There are several trees that already exist right next to our homes. Will a barrier or fence be built to continue to separate the property? And just an FYI, if someone can build a fence on their own property to separate it, but if there could be a conversation about how an area might be developed and whether we would require any buffers in the code. Says that, can you next time review what green space trees are available for both proposed plans? And yes, we can go into more detail about the tree preservation. And then it says, if each of the 6 units has a driving teen, parking may be a problem. Would having a deeper setback allow for diagonal street parking in this area? The Public Works Department would probably say that they do not have enough right of way in order to do something like that. But we can add that to the list of questions. Anyone else that's on Zoom wants to put their hands up? If anyone else wants to speak. And then, oh, there's one. So Ricky Vaughn, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, my name is Rick Vaughn. My father-in-law, Melvin Moore, stay on 204 Euclid Street, right down the street from the development that's coming. And he's also the pastor of 113 Thornton Avenue, Gospel Temple Church of God in Christ. Now, he's been in the community for the past 60 years. So he basically bought the property right behind the butt of this development that's coming in. We're actually at 556, one of his daughters owned that home, and 548 Bell up against the back end of this development. And I noticed you guys have, well, the developers have cleaned off the lot. And I noticed a lot of trees with pink straps around them that is right up to the butt of the house. So I'm just kind of like concerned as far as how they're going to develop that with all the big trees to make it beautify, where even we, if there's something that go through, would be pleasant on our eyes to see every day, because it's right up on us. And my question is, would it be a wall, a fence, or something like that? Because we just kind of concerned about what all this is going to do for us, because we're right here at this development. That's one of the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, that can be answered by showing in more detail at the April meeting all the trees that are being preserved. The ones that are marked off right now, they were approved for. In order to demolish the structures, they had to provide tree preservation fencing to protect all the trees during the demolitions. The demolitions had been previously approved a number of years ago to come down. So we would be more specific in the April meeting about trees being protected and whether any fencing or development elements could be added to the ordinance in terms of barricades between the different properties.
Can I ask just one question?
Yes.
So when we're, thinking up, with the ordinance or putting together ordinance, can we increase the buffer, like 25-foot setback? Can we make that bigger?
You can
Depending on-
increase,
Depending on the information you're gonna get.
Yeah, you can definitely increase setbacks and you can increase buffer requirements. You can put in place, depending on where the trees are located or open spaces or what the development is proposing, you can create a setback that doesn't necessarily have to be an exact, parallel line to it. You can increase something that could protect certain areas.
Okay, thank you.
And then I just wanted to let Mr. Vaughn know, I can't put you back on to speak a second time, but if you want to email questions in, we can answer those questions. Oh, sorry, that was the timer.
Okay, are we
I don't
Public?
see any more people here that want to speak. I don't see any more hands online.
Does anybody on the commission have anything else they want to?
I just wanted to say we don't usually answer questions from from public comment, but I thought that was nice. I'm glad we were able to take some time to do that. Thank you, Mara, for doing that.
Yeah, definitely. Normally we try to, if there's a way to do a quick answer for some of them, but if it's more complex, we don't. But a lot of these, I think, had some pretty straightforward answers that could be done today. But we'll, again, continue to gather all the questions and answer them more in full with the report.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I did maybe just, with regard to some of the comments about gentrification and change in the neighborhood, just looking at here, council determined whether or not we adversely affect the character of the neighborhood, adversely affect the general welfare. I assume their intent of that is more along the lines, you're not going to build a meth house or a house of ill repute or something than some of these broader questions. And I'm being silly to try and make a point. I don't know if maybe that's something the city attorney could come, just clarification of what does that mean? And I'm just always conscious as a council member of what I'm trying to vote on. And I'd like to get as specific as possible because you want to, as a council member, listen to people, but also there are private property rights. And so just trying to get a handle on that.
Yeah, and we can cover that in more detail on what can be allowed and not allowed. And I know there were references to this overall large square footages of, very large houses. I gave those initial square footages of what could be built on the lots today without the PEU. The PEU is not proposing houses of that size. And that is something that the floor area ratio is a consideration that the Plan Commission can make recommendations on in terms of the overall number and total square footage that you would allow to be built. So that is something that can keep that number in conformance with what would be allowed in the general area overall.
Okay, is there a motion to keep the public hearing open to the April 4th meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to continue this public hearing to April 4th, 2022. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anybody?
Aye.
I don't think we need a voice vote on that.
No, you don't need a voice vote on it.
Okay. Next item on the agenda.
We have no plats or site plans tonight, so it's adjournment of the regular session, and we have no executive session. So we're other business.
I don't think I have any other business at this time. If anyone has any
I have a
questions.
question.
Yes.
My wife keeps asking me this. What coffee shop is going in next to the bank there, the Regions Bank?
So I don't actually have a name of the coffee shop yet. I'm sorry. I can't help her curiosity on that one.
I'm going to have her call you next time. Okay, anybody else?
I just have a quick announcement. The Business Development Commission has posted a survey on the website. You go to administration/business roundtable, and anyone is welcome to fill that out.
Thanks.
For those that are listening, I was happy to see that we had quite a few members watching on Zoom. This meeting will be available with the full presentation on the city's YouTube website. So if anyone wants to have another neighbor that they want to see what happened or additional questions. Also, my email address is available on the signs in the front yard of the properties. In case there are questions or additional feedback you want to send to staff to give to the Plan Commission for the next meeting.
Is there a motion to adjourn? I think that's next.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, we're adjourned.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Coming.
Good night. It went from freezing cold in here to really hot, and then it went freezing cold again. Did you feel that? I thought it was just me.